Bienvenidos, freight fans of the hottest entertainment on the planet. Jaime En Fuego here, and I'm so very stoked to, a couple months after its release, to be finally getting around to my review of none other than Joe Hill's King Sorrow in my first installment in a great long while of Run to Joe Hill! I didn't really think that I was going to be able to hit that note because you might hear some of the congestion going down, which really sucks, unfortunately, anytime it happens around the holidays. But I have a little bit of backstory about this one because it came out October 21st, and there was a signing that he was doing and like a little speaking engagement in Los Angeles, and it was from that I obtained this signed copy. I think it's my third of signed stuff by Joe Hill. My most prized of all of them is when he was doing the Full Throttle tour, and he was here in the deadly desert of Arizona in Scottsdale, and I got to actually meet him, take a photo, have a personalized signing sort of thing going down, which was great. And then they got a signed copy of Fireman down there. So anyway, nevertheless, The Fireman, I think, was his longest novel up until this point, if I remember. It was like 7-something, and then his novel before that, Nosferatu, was just barely below 700, if I remember. So those were both big behemoth books, man, but this one is just shy of 900 pages. So it is the largest novel that Sai Joe has ever done, and, you know, I have read and reviewed everything that Joe Hill has published, all of his major releases and stuff. The only one that I have not gotten around to, because I obtained this, and just so many other things to read, so much other stuff to do and watch and review and whatnot, but this little baby, Gunpowder, is one that I am definitely going to get to in 2026, because it's the only thing of his, aside from like an early short story or two that was never collected in 20th Century Ghosts or anything of that nature, that he has put out. So in October, when I first obtained the book, went through around half of it. I want to say I was maybe in book 3 when a couple characters, well, I'll get to stuff anyway. So, but what ended up happening was my cohort in crime, Cecil, aired on the Horror Show channel, and as of this recording, I'm not 100% if this is going to be on my personal channel, Enfuegotainment, or if it's going to be over on the Horror Show, because that's where I did all the Run to Joe Hill coverage for the longest time, and also all of the Hail to Stephen King coverage. His dad, over 330 episodes of Hail to Stephen King, but yeah, those programs both migrated over to my personal channel when I went back to Arizona State University to finish up a film and media studies degree, and Cecil was getting everything rounded out for his Dylan's New Nightmare, which if y'all haven't seen, it's tremendous. I got to do some music with my band for that, which was great. But so anyway, I get to about this midpoint where the book was, in my estimation, dragon, like How to Train Your Dragon. This is all about a dragon in King Sorrow. At least it's like the main kind of linchpin, antagonist, whatever you want to say, but there's other antagonists. This is a big, bloated book, and it's ginormous ambitious, but I was losing a little bit of interest, you know, in the midsection of this book, admittedly enough. And so Cecil came to me with the idea of, hey man, Stranger Things, the final season is about to hit. How about I go through all the comics and review them, and you go through all of the books and review them. And for Stranger Things, I had read the first 2 books, Suspicious Minds and then Darkness on the Edge of Town, which, you know, first one being about Eleven's mother and backstory about her and Brenner, and then second one there being about Hopper back when he was a cop in in New York City in the 70s. So, yeah, King Sorrow took a back seat for 2 months, and we are just rounding out all of our coverage on the Horror Show of all of that Stranger Things content, and so I got through all 10 of those books, and I was hoping to get to this around, you know, the holiday season, and then when I got sick, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna just pound through this as quickly as possible. So even though I am still like feeling the congestion and everything, I wanted to get to this and all my pages and pages of notes about it while it was still relatively fresh. And so, as I always like to do, I both read it and then I also listened to it as well, and went back and just took a deeper look at certain passages in the book, because once again, ginormous ambitious, at times to its detriment. I did enjoy this book, and I'm still ruminating about it because of the fact that as of now, as of this recording, I prefer the Fireman and I prefer Nosferatu. But, you know, I mean, when I revisit a few other parts, which I want to do in time, who knows where that could be. So if y'all bear with me, I'm definitely going to have to be sipping the drink and stuff. Trying to clear the throat a little bit in said regard. So this will be long form, overall impressions and things of that nature, which we like to do on the horror show. But then I am going to be going through the sections of this book because it's divided up into books and interludes. And and that's where there is a inevitability of spoilers, so I will give some forewarning once I hit that particular point. So, I mean, overall impressions, this definitely leans very heavily into fantasy. I mean, King Sorrow, you see on the cover, you know, this dragon, this red dragon with these yellow eyes and everything, and when I say red dragon, I'm suddenly thinking of Thomas Harris, but in any event, everybody, so you've got and this is where I can't help but just see the similarities to this and maybe his dad's most celebrated novel, at least as of right now, after It Welcome to Derry concluded, which took the framework of one of the interludes, and as I said, this book has interludes peppered through the main segments of the book, but it took one of the interludes with pertinence to the Black Spot and then added a bunch of new characters around it. It started out kind of ho-hum for me, but I was really, really impressed with it by the time it got to the very end and everything, but can't help but see the similarities between this book at times and his father's just, you know, iconic release in It. So you've got a group of 6 friends that they all meet when they're in college, so it doesn't go like the adolescent route like It did with the Losers Club and everything. But these friends are almost like the anti-Losers Club because, you know, being a little bit older and everything, I mean, if you thought kind of the ribbing and the ball busting and stuff was something with, you know, the Losers Club boasting their younger and older iterations, man alive, they are just like, the snark levels are very high amongst these friends, especially early on when we meet them in college and stuff in 1989, which is where the book begins with a segment called The Briars. It's entitled Book 1. So you have who I kind of thought was going to be the main character in Arthur Oakes, and he is a young black man, one of only 3 black students in 1989 at this fictional, I'm assuming it's a fictional university, Rackham College, I believe, but it's in Maine, so it's Joe actually setting a story in his home state of Maine. He currently lives in New Hampshire, so I'm assuming he wanted to, you know, be in New England, but yet I believe New Hampshire's a part of New England, but if I'm incorrect, please brutalize me in the comments. But still wants to have that little distance for him and Jillian and, you know, the family and stuff from Tabby and his pops, Sai King and everything. But so taking place in Maine, at least initially, and a lot of it even as we get later into the book does, but this goes all over the place as we get to the later books and everything. We spend some time over in the UK. But anyway, so Arthur Oakes becomes friends with these other 5 peeps, which are, so you have Gwen Underfoot, who kind of becomes his love interest. She is the youngest of their little quartet crew. And then you also have Colin Wren. Colin Wren is the one who lives on the Briar estate with his grandfather, who is unfortunately terminally ill with AIDS, but Colin is the one who comes from the most money of this group. And another thing to mention about Arthur, the black student that I mentioned, who I kind of thought was going to be the main character, but it turns very much into an ensemble as we go through the entire near 900 pages of it. Arthur is obsessed with medieval literature and culture, and he wants to essentially follow in his father's footsteps of going over to England and being a professor of medieval literature over there. He's versed in, I think, like 5 or 6 languages, if I remember correctly, and so as far as academically, he is the most ambitious of this crew. Now, the crew is filled out by Allie Shiner, who is a Christian girl from Texas, who, you know, doesn't drop profanity and stuff like that, but unfortunately, the big thing with her is that she is a repressed lesbian, and so she is essentially in love with one of these 2 twins. So there is a, I'm trying to remember their last names right now, so it's the McBride twins. Donna, who is the girl that Allie is in love with, and then Donovan, but he goes by Van for everybody. So it's one of those twin sibling trios where the brother and the sister, when they came out of the womb, the parents were like, yeah, we want them to have names that are nearly identical. I've always found that thing with parents who have, you know, boy-girl twins to be like very peculiar. You know, I'm not going to say odd or strange or anything like that, but, you know, I can't really understand the logic to it, not being a parent or anything myself, much less twins. But, so, that rounds out our main group, the 6 of them. So Arthur, Gwen, Colin, Van, Donna, and Allie. But as their friendship kind of really becomes a lot closer during, I think if I recall correctly, Arthur and Van, who are roommates, they're in their 3rd year, which is when they moved off campus. That's mentioned very, very early in the book. But their friendship becomes a lot more tightly knit when they start spending a lot of time at the Briars estate, which is where Colin Wren lives with his grandfather. His dad is deceased. I can't remember if the mother is deceased as well, or not around, or whatever. Now I'm kind of remembering a spoilery detail that I'm not going to get into, but so anyway, they start hanging out at this huge estate, and as they do that, they start to realize that Colin's grandfather has kind of an obsession with the occult when he was in his much younger years, and you know, just sowing his wild gay oats as a younger gay man who was a part of the military's like brainwashing, like mind control sort of stuff, which is actually, ironically enough, explored in that second Stranger Things book that I mentioned earlier with Hopper, Darkness on the Edge of Town. But so he had written this book about brainwashing that was used, if I remember, during like Korea and Vietnam, like in the post World War II Iron Curtain era and everything. He was like one of the most just well-regarded of this subject matter of like just mind control and things of that nature, but coinciding with that was his obsession with the occult. And so he has this cabinet of curiosities which is filled with all of these all of these occult artifacts. And so as these 6 peeps are all, you know, becoming much tighter with each other, Arthur, who has a mother who is in prison for a like manslaughter charge, that she was a kind of adamant advocate for just like protesting and things like that. So it was not an intentional murder, but she's in serving her time for manslaughter. And this is the very first thing that we encounter in the book, is where, and this is like the inciting incident, I guess is what you would call it in screenwriting. So Arthur is there visiting his mother, and when he is there, his act of kindness to this girl, Tana, who he actually recognizes from this Shut Up and Eat It, I think, if I remember, pizza joint that she works at. So he recognizes her from this kind of scuzzy pizza joint that's near campus. But Tana is there as well, wearing a GNR shirt. And the guard is like, nah, you can't come in wearing that, you know, can't have anything with guns on it, you know, it's against the rules. And so he kindly gives her a, I believe it's a sweatshirt, something like that, a hoodie, that was his mother's and that he wears in, like, you know, remembrance of, you know, when she was around for him as opposed to being locked up. And so, as they always say, you know, no kind act goes unpunished or whatever. So his act of kindness turns into, there's a scuffle that transpires between Tana's and her sister Jane's mother, who is like, she's a real, like, ill bitch, man. Like, you know, just, like, tough as nails, real mean, and in for much more serious charges. But there's a scuffle, and the said scuffle gets Jane and Tana's mother, like, locked up in solitary. And so what ends up happening is Jane, her boyfriend Ronnie, and Tana, who was kind of an accessory to it, but kind of a reluctant accomplice, they essentially decide to blackmail Arthur because he works at the Rackham Library, and they want him to start stealing these rare books so they can hawk them in Boston, up to the tune of $60,000, which is a lot of money back in 1989. So as Arthur is being blackmailed by these shitheads, that's when his friendship deepens with the other 5 in their quartet. And so, yeah, what ends up happening is the occult connection with, what's his name, Colin Wren's grandfather. They watch this old, like, reel, like, so it's it's a video, something that was shot, but I mean, it was on, like, you would actually have to have a projector, like an actual real film and stuff, where there was this seance transpiring, and at the same time, there is a very rare book, which I'm trying to remember his name, Enoch Crane, that's it. And so, the Memoirs of Enoch Crane, this was a guy in New England who was considered this, like, evil heretic person. He's killed, he's executed by the townsfolk, and then they actually bind his memoirs in, like, his own flesh. It's definitely some Necronomicon stuff, and they even mention it in the book. But so anyway, long story short, the book is the one that Jane, the, like, ringleader of the blackmail crew that I mentioned, she wants Arthur to steal that one because that is the one that this book collector in Boston really, really wants. And before they hand it over to her, they do their own little seance thing, which was kind of inspired, the way that they go about it, by that film reel that they watched that was in possession of Colin's grandfather. And they summon this dragon, King Sorrow, and they make a deal with King Sorrow that he will basically seek vengeance on Jane and Ronnie and stuff. And I guess Tana is not as much of an accessory for King Sorrow to think that she needs to be a part of that sort of, you know, retribution. So, yeah, they make this pact with King Sorrow, and they think that all is going to be hunky-dory, and yeah, so he goes after Jane and Ronnie, and they think it's going to be like a one-and-done sort of situation, but lo and behold, they find out that, yeah, this is going to be a yearly thing on Easter where there has to be blood offered up. There has to be, like, some fresh meat for this King Sorrow, who, the way Joe writes King Sorrow is, like, kind of amusing, but yet also a little strange and didn't always work for me at times, especially instance that happens later in the book where King Sorrow is kind of bargaining with another character, and he mentions that he wants Nebraska. He's like, okay, if you want, you can just give me Nebraska. And I'm thinking of the way the narrator for the audiobook goes about it, which is really funny. And he says, okay, give me the state of Nebraska. And I can't do it with the sickness, unfortunately. But, and then he's like, and all they will be allowed to drink is Schlitz and Diet Dr. Pepper. So there's a weird sense of humor going on, but also, even though this this dragon comes out of a place that is described as the Long Dark, which I couldn't help but say, okay, that sounds a lot like Todash, you know, from the Tower books, from, you know, your father, Steve King and everything. But aside from that, yeah, just the knowledge of, like, modern things, despite the fact that, you know, King Sorrow the Dragon also describes itself as being, you know, born, I think it's like 3,000 years before Christ was born, or something crazy like that. It's hiding in my notes somewhere here, but, you know, thousands and thousands of years, you know, he was born from this, like, in front of this volcano, you know, thousands and thousands of years before Christ was even born, and so that's just him making it well known to this this Rackham Quartet about the extent of his powers and everything. So, but that's just book one, guys, because this has 4 other books. It also has all the aforementioned interludes, and it slowly moves forward in time. I mean, it starts in, you know, 1989, as I mentioned, and if I recall correctly, it ends in, I want to say, like, 2016-ish, something like that. Yeah, it's, actually, no, it goes all the way up to 2022. So, I mean, this is a very lengthy book as far as a number of things that happen after the initial bit with King Sorrow and, you know, having, you know, the protection from these guys who are, you know, just really being absolute assholes to Arthur and everything. But, yeah, after they realize this is going to be a yearly thing on Easter where they have to have some palaver with King Sorrow, and as he is growing in power and Easter approaches, he's going to eventually let them know, he is going to eventually have them let him know who he's going to go after, and if they don't decide on someone or a group of someone's or anything of that nature, he's going to end up taking one of them. And it's also like kind of a carousel in the fact that it's a different member of our quartet of 6 choosing every single time. So one year it would be Arthur, another year Colin, another year Allie, and you know, another year one of the twins, another year Gwen. But excuse me. But the thing is, you find out after a while that Colin is the one who is kind of really leading the proceedings as far as them finding people or groups of people to go after that are just absolutely deplorable. And so they can kind of, like their consciences can rest collectively about the fact that, okay, well, it's not that bad because we're letting, this evil dragon, this, deal with the devil of sorts that they have made. Well, if he's going after bad people, it's not going to hit us too hard as far as like the guilt factor or anything of that nature. And so, yeah, we follow all these characters over the years, and as I mentioned initially, you really think it's going to be Arthur as the main focus, but he ends up going off to the UK to pursue his masters, and that is where, despite the fact that the quartet here, the main quartet, keeps coming back together over the years, and we get this amusing bit where there's an earlier bit where it's Halloween and they're all dressed up as the Scooby Squad, which is kind of funny, but the one which is a much more major incident because it's filmed by one of the members is where they all dress up as different D&D characters and they have a run-in with a lacrosse team outside of a roller rink, and that actually, the video of that plays a big part in the conclusion of this book, which I must admit I didn't find supremely satisfying. This is kind of, before I start really heading into some more spoilery stuff here in a little bit, anytime you have something this large, and also the fact that Joe admits in the acknowledgments at the end of the book that he finished writing this, he finished the manuscript in 2022, and then he let it sit for around a year, he came back to it, and so this was finished before it hit the editors and like the tinkering and everything, but he also mentions that he didn't do like major rewrites, it was just like, he consulted some people for like mild tinkering and editing and things of that nature, but he finished the manuscript 3 years before it was published, which is crazy. So I think maybe this book could have been trimmed down. That is one of my biggest criticisms of it, is that we have so many different like big time things. Like if they were going to adapt this into something, because we have like book 2, for instance, is this like lengthy bit on a plane that most definitely dragons. It is a exercise in dragon in more ways than one with that pun. And then book 3 is where a couple of our characters have they're not quite a government agency, but they work in conjunction with the United States government, this private agency of like mercenaries and stuff that go after 2 of our characters. And those characters are taken in and like tortured as they're trying to get information about the nature of this dragon because they've learned about it. And then, by the time you get to, and that's book 3, and then by the time you get to book 4, we finally get back to Arthur in like a major process where, he admits to having discovered a giant at one particular point when he was out in I believe he said he was in Wales or something, but then he claims that he's discovered a troll, and then so there's so many characters, and not so many characters, this isn't like The Stand per se, but I just feel like in The Fireman, which was also by Joe and had a pretty sizable, contingent of characters and everything. It's not so much that there's too many characters, but I feel like there's too many subplots that don't always, coalesce with everything. Anytime you're getting this ambitious, I think, and you have so many ideas that you're wanting to just, stuff into this turkey, overstuff the turkey, as we like to say, when there's just, as I said, a big bloated book. That's where you're kind of playing with fire, with dragon's fire, and you risk the danger of just having too much going on. There is another subplot, which is the one where I did not think really worked at all, where Jane and Ronnie, okay, so Jane, the girl who was blackmailing Arthur, at the very beginning of the book, so her mother, after the dragon goes after her daughter, he was involved in that incident in prison and gets locked up, which is why Arthur was being blackmailed in the first place, because they blame Arthur for their mom getting locked up in solitary. There's a subplot with going back to her in prison and her wanting to get revenge on our Rackham Quartet, and it didn't work for me. It felt very much, to go back to a comparison in It kind of felt like when Beverly's husband when we're with the adult losers, where he like wants to go after, you know, the adult losers club and everything, and you know, all of the jealousy there, and that character felt completely unnecessary. Just like book 3, the bit that I was mentioning earlier that didn't really work as much for me, like this villainous mercenary group that wants to torture 2 of our characters to get information about the dragon because they want to help them go after, you know, other countries the US is, you know, at odds with. I mean, it was just too much of a villainous presence. And then there's also, at the end, at the end of book 4 into book 5, like, we get a major reveal and a villain turn from a certain character that, I mean, I enjoyed the character. They didn't have, like, the best sort of, you know, characteristics at all times, but I don't know if it was like as earned as I wanted it to be within the, you know, constraints of the narrative. And so that's where I just keep going back to the fact that, you know, it's a big bloated book and it has so many interesting ideas, but I just don't know if they all fit together super well. Now, as always, Joe's prose is terrific. And you know, his dialogue, the snark that I was mentioning earlier, the interplay amongst all of these characters, and also how he develops them all so distinctively, you know. Arthur and Gwen, the reason they kind of, you know, are magnetically drawn to each other is because they are 2 of the most virtuous of all the characters. And then Allie with all of her trouble with alcoholism. But the thing is, the reason I said this was the anti-losers club is because they're all pretty much successful as, you know, they get older. Now, Gwen is not the one who comes from any sort of money. She's the one who lives on, like, the you know, much more poor side of town in the area of Maine where all of these characters are residing for college and everything when they first get acquainted with her. Because she's actually the daughter of the housekeeper for the Colin Wren character. Anyway, but, you know, they're all still doing very well for themselves in adulthood, but they're all, like, relatively troubled. And how I mentioned that Arthur and Gwen are the most virtuous, like, the rest of these characters are very troubled. Colin is the most successful, becoming a tech boy, but, you know, the Colin character, both of the twins in Van and Donna, and then also Allie, they're both these, like, drunk drug addict, like, crazies, and, like, the rage that Donna deals with, the repressed homosexuality that Allie deals with, and, you know, that is tied in a lot of ways with her alcoholism, but also the fact that it's like a not another cheerleader or whatever it was, or I'm a cheerleader. I'm trying to remember the name of the movie where they sent, you know, to pray the gay away and all that. But yeah, it was that sort of situation with Allie, and, you know, the fact that she marries Van and yet isn't really attracted to him because she's not really attracted to men, and yet Van still loved, like, Van might have been my favorite character of all of these. Like, he's a cokehead and, you know, he's a drunk, and yet he has the most heart aside from the Gwen character and the Arthur character. But yeah, Arthur takes a big time back seat until we get a major component with him in book 4, you know, when Arthur finally gets to make a triumphant return and everything. So as you can tell, I still haven't really gone into, like, a full-blown spoilery mode about this because I've been trying to walk on eggshells, kind of trying to dance around it. So, and then without getting into specifics about the conclusion, and, you know, you kind of get the vibe of where things are going to go as far as everything boiling up and how eventually they are going to try to get out of this pact with this, like, devilish dragon and not have to offer people up every year and all of the dangers associated with that. So once again, there's a lot going on in this book, man, and it does jump from its focus from character to character, which is another thing which we had in it, where we had, like, these full lengthy chapters about, you know, one of the adult losers and then another adult loser and whatnot and so forth. But the very expected boiling point that it eventually gets to, I don't know, I guess I didn't find it quite as satisfying. Now, it does really tie in. Maybe if I was a much bigger fan of, like, this high fantasy, like, medieval sort of approach, I mean, I would be a little bit more into this. And yes, there is fun, you know, kind of Easter eggs about, like, Monty Python, and, you know, obviously you would be remiss to not expect, you know, Tolkien mentions in here, and, you know, of course, Smaug is mentioned and everything. And, you know, for the first time since Nosferatu, and as many could argue, Fireman being a twinner novel to The Stand in a lot of ways, but yeah, he gives some connective tissue to Easter eggs about his father. Like, you know, there is mention of Stilson, the politician that John Smith goes after in the Dead Zone, and you get some revelation about what happened to Stilson after the failed assassination attempt. And then you also get a fun Easter egg where there's a character reading Inside View, which, you know, Night Flyer, and also from Dead Zone. It's a tabloid, kind of like, I don't know, National Enquirer or Weekly World News or some of that shit that had like Bat Boy on it and whatnot and wrote about UFOs. So a kind of trashy tabloid, but that's mentioned at one point too. So the fact that he even dropped in Easter eggs, making it seem like this could be taking place in the same sort of connective tissue multiverse as all of his father's stuff, I always find that cool when Joe, because he's not heavy-handed with it. So that was fun as a constant reader myself who has read and reviewed all of his father's stuff as well. So that was cool, but yeah, maybe where it goes with, you know, trolls and, you know, a showdown with the dragon, all these different things, maybe that could be more interesting for, you know, people like my buddy Mike Kearns from Mike's Book Reviews, who is like the most, I mean, for me, maybe one of the most revered in all of BookTube about, you know, that sort of high fantasy stuff, you know, being a big, you know, Robert Jordan guy and various other series that I have never read because I'm just not, I'm a horror guy, little bit of science fiction, you know, but I'm definitely a horror guy. I'm not as much a fantasy guy, although I have enjoyed when his father, you know, when Stephen King has written more on the medieval side of things. I love the Tower stuff, but, you know, all of those Tower books are often an amalgamation of many things: science fiction, horror, fantasy, Western. I mean, so that was just like, I don't know, that was a like a stew of so many different flavors, excuse me, that just worked so incredibly well. Eyes of the Dragon is terrific, which his father wrote, Stephen King, and even went through the keyhole, which is one of those like completely in mid-world sort of stories and ties in with Eyes of the Dragon with Delane, I believe it is, and whatnot. But anyway, perhaps some of the themes of Arthur's obsession with, you know, medieval history, I mean, he's named Arthur, and Gwendolyn, and the fact that, you know, when they first summoned King Sorrow, it's even mentioned by him. He's like, oh, I knew an Arthur and a Gwendolyn, you know, all these years ago, and so on. So, I mean, there's a lot of nods and winks, and I would imagine many that went completely over my head, but interestingly enough, this also, Joe has kind of an obsession in this book as well with the advancement of technology and how it gained, you know, from the end of the 80s into the 90s and the 2000s and beyond, you know, spyware and, you know, being able to, you know, track people with cell phones and all these different things. Like, that's another thing that it's not even so much subtext, it is very much a theme. So we go from the ancient and medieval with a lot of the themes, but then also to the advancement of technology and some of the dangers within that. So, I mean, once again, it's an ambitious book in a lot of ways, but it also, at other times, kind of, I don't want to say reeks of excess, but I mean, most definitely has it on clear display. So, I mean, I don't know. That is constructive criticism because, as I mentioned, I really enjoyed these characters. I really genuinely did. And I like how, you know, Joe made them so, in certain cases, ferociously flawed. Like, you know, the Allie character is so sweet, but her alcoholism is so out of control. And as Donna, her character, becomes this kind of rah-rah, anti-establishment, like, kind of alt-right podcaster person. And then, you know, Van writing for Rolling Stone. Like, Van, once again, man, Van is possibly my favorite of... No, he is my favorite of these characters in this, you know, main quartet. But, you know, the crew also grows. You know, you still have Tana, and she's pregnant at the beginning of the book, and yet the reason she's kind of spared by the vengeance of King Sorrow is because of the fact that she's being forced by her crazy bitch older sister, you know, the drug dealer, into just, you know, being that accomplice, as I mentioned, when she's not really the most willing participant. And so she has a very well-developed arc of just trying to leave the shackles and all of the negativity of, you know, her older crazy sister essentially being left to raise her while their mother is in prison. And so Tana has a great arc, but then there's another character, I believe Robin Fellows, and so it's this trans woman who they meet on the plane in book 2. So you have the Allie character, and I guess, you know, I'm starting to veer into spoilers, so I guess for all, I've kind of given my overall thoughts and given into a lot of stuff where I can be kind of vague about certain beats and how they connect to other things and whatnot. So I guess turn back now for all who don't want my deeper impressions about all of this stuff. But so yeah, if so, grande gracias to you, but I'm going to continue, and if you are sticking around, say thank you. Anyway, so the Jane character and her boyfriend Ronnie are killed by the dragon. They think that they can potentially try to escape, and, you know, so they drive from Maine, and they're all the way out in California, and the dragon still gets them. King Sorrow's still there at this, like, drive-in theater, and, you know, Ronnie gets, you know, taken up into the sky and dropped, and, you know, street pizza splatter, and then, you know, Jane, like the real bitch-faced ringleader that I mentioned, the older sister of Tana, you know, she gets charred to a crisp and everything, and the way Joe describes her death is really gnarly and everything, about how she had forgotten to eat earlier that day, and when she smells her roasting flesh, it reminds her before her eyeballs pop of how she's hungry as she smells her body roasting before she's completely done so. Like, Joe definitely has a knack for, like, the grotesque in that regard, and yet he's restrained, and, like, he implements restraint about it in this, which I genuinely appreciate. But yeah, the stuff with Enoch Crane, I most definitely found that to be, you know, kind of interesting, and so that sort of villainous presence and whatnot. I mean, I definitely enjoyed that stuff, and the obsession with just the occult and how that kind of works as a catalyst for this quartet to really even think that they would use the Crazy Heretics memoir to try to summon a presence from the Long Dark, aka Todash, you know, that could assist them with, I mean, kind of this, it feels like more of a trifling problem to feel that your only means of going against, you know, these blackmailing kids, you know, where Arthur is stealing from the library and everything, is by consulting an otherworldly evil. It seems silly, it seems kind of immature and short-sighted, you know, especially when they find out and they seem so surprised that they were tricked and thought it was going to be a one-time deal. You know? So, I mean, that was cool. You know, another Easter egg that I do have to definitely mention is another nod to Joe's father, Stephen King, where the dark man fled across the snow and Arthur Oakes followed. And that's where they actually see the spirit of the Enoch Crane guy, and so Arthur chases him. So I thought that was a really cool thing. Of course, you would expect a dragon to be willing to riddle, and there's a funny joke about Milwaukee's Best in this that is used as a riddle with the dragon, and the dragon can't solve the riddle. It's pretty funny, you know, despite, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of years of all of this knowledge. It's Gwen hears it earlier in the book and then decides when she's having this palaver with King Sorrow and kind of bargaining with him to use it, which is, but yeah, Gwen Underfoot, man, I mean, she really, by the time we get to the very end of the book, becomes our big time hero, and I kind of expected her to be, because every one of the interludes was about her. So Gwen, underfoot, Gwen, under arrest, Gwen, under the shadow, and so on and so forth. So I kind of expected her to be ultimately the hero that was gonna, you know, be able to rise to the occasion in the face of all such adversity, and you know, be really the one who leads the charge in trying to defeat this dragon and everything. But yeah, book 2, guys, I mean, Dragonity O'Clock and the countdown of all of that, and I was definitely getting vibes of, I want to say it was it You Were Released? Yeah, that was a really great short story that Joe Hill wrote about this plane that, as like nuclear Armageddon is happening down on the ground, and you know, the world is essentially ending, and this plane can't make its landing, and it's about all of these characters on this plane as the plane just continues circling, and it's going to continue circling until it runs out of fuel. Thank you for all bearing with. I do greatly appreciate it. But so it had some similarities, at least as far as the setting and the fact that, you know, I mean, Flight or Fright, which I believe was the name of the collection that story took place in. So, I mean, more nods to those in the know, I suppose. But the person that they're going to sacrifice that year to King Sorrow is apparently this, like, religious fanatic who's kind of like a Timothy McVeigh type. Timothy McVeigh's even mentioned. Ugh, and I hate even mentioning that fucking piece of shit. But anyway, so Allie is on this plane, and then Van, her husband, joins her, and that's where they make the acquaintance of Robin Fellows, who is a publisher from the UK, and becomes essentially a member of their quartet, and plays a big part, well, not a big part, but definitely a bit of a pivotal part, and helps in the finale without getting into too much detail before I actually get to the end, because this is still just book 2, guys, you know? So yeah, something that I did not necessarily buy into as much or think was as interesting, I don't know, just felt a little off to me, is the fact that this Horatio, as he's referred to, this, you know, religious fanatical whack job that Allie has chosen as their, like, sacrificial lamb and everything, you know, who she's on this plane, because, you know, the way Sorrow basically puts it to her, he's like, you know, if he's on this plane, you know, it's not just going to be him that dies, it's going to be all these other people, and so she's on the plane because of their protection pact, and so, you know, Sorrow will, because Sorrow's constantly conniving in this, obviously, so, I mean, yeah, just the fact that the fighters, there's like fighter jets on the side because of the fact that they have seen this dragon, they've detected it, and they're up there investigating, and Sorrow's like taking fighter planes out and everything, and yet there's still this guy on the plane, like, but the fact that Horatio had palaver with the dragon and everything, he was aware of its existence, all that stuff, I don't know how much it all worked, but, you know, the addition of, you know, the trans woman Robin that I mentioned, her character is amusing and just kind of funny with her drunken British snark and everything, and so lo and behold, dude ends up dying, and, you know, Sorrow is like, I don't know, satisfied or whatever, and yet as we jump after another Gwenny interlude up to book 3 called Double Feature, that's where you find out that Van has jumped upward from writing for Rolling Stone to having written about that entire experience. And so he publishes this, like, schlocky book that is alleging, like, based on true events and everything, and, you know, has interviewed a bunch of people that were on the plane, and yet he kind of guides them all to not mention having seen this flying iguana or whatever, this dragon, but, you know, the fact that it was, like, it's one of those UFO fanatical sort of, you know, based on true events kind of thing, and yet the book was thought to be a bad idea by Colin Wren, the one who is, like, worth hundreds of millions at this point and is the techie bro by now, because at this point it's, it's the year 2000 by now, so 11 years have gone by, he's supremely successful, but Arthur thought it was a bad idea, Colin thought it was a bad idea, and yet it's still published, and Robin, the one that they meet on the plane, publishes it, and that's when the aforementioned secret mercenary agency takes Van and his sister Donna both into custody for the tortures that I had mentioned, trying to get information out. And this is where Van essentially ends up, you know, and they're there for like weeks or months or some crazy amount of time because they've even lost track of how long they've been there. And, you know, they're just drilling them further and further for information. They're using like ice water torture and everything on Van. And, you know, Donna being the feisty chica that she is, man, I mean, she's refusing to give them anything. But Van, as I said, you know, maybe my favorite character in the book, he ends up relenting and giving some details and everything. But then, despite all of his cocaine and booze-drenched flaws, yeah, he ends up, you know, jumping from like 4 stories, you know, to like, you know, to sacrifice himself, and then, you know, for the sake of his sister. And, you know, they do mention many times throughout the book that there was a very, very deep connection with the two of them, and certain flashback bits to describing their childhood and everything. And even like at the very, very beginning, where they're like trying to read each other's cards. It's very reminiscent of the scene early in Ghostbusters, you know, where Bill Murray is like giving the shock treatment to those people. But anyway, yeah, very deep connection, and Van makes a very virtuous choice, you know, to try to save his sister. And, but yet Colin, with all of his money and technological interconnectivity, is able to get Donna out of there. And so just that entire segment, that was where it just felt so bloated and like it could have been truncated. Like, if Joe hadn't really had his stock upped very much over the years between the Lock and Key television series, the Nosferatu show, the couple Black Phone movies that have happened now, I mean, his stock is way higher now than it ever was in years past. And so, I don't know, maybe his editors didn't, like, wrangle him in a little bit for this near 900-page monster. So, I mean, I'm just making sure, yeah, and this is where the whole Nebraska comment by our Devilish Dragon is mentioned. It's quite funny. And then, you know, we get another Gwen interlude in this particular bit, and this is where we have another one of those subplots that I don't know how well it works, because we find out more about the fact that Donna had this childhood friend, Katie Lewis, who was kidnapped and found, like, murdered and mutilated and obviously killed and everything. And so, I mean, she is essentially trying to find who she believes was responsible, because it's Donna's turn of this proverbial wheel to choose who's gonna die, you know, who's gonna be sacrificed to sorrow. And she decides that they're gonna destroy this Black Cricket prison, this women's prison, which was giving me major vibes to the one which is in Sleeping Beauties, which was written about by Joe's brother Owen along with Papa Steve. But so that is just, it ties in more and more with these subplots that didn't mean as much to me as the reader, and I always say art is subjective. So if you really dug these bits and thought that it just gave more supplemental, like, levity and just intrigue and just made Donna a more well-developed character because of the fact that she wanted vengeance. But this was another one, you know, break some eggs to make an omelet sort of situation where, you know, there's a lot of disagreement with Donna's decision to have Sorrow go after and destroy this prison of women, because, you know, some of the rest of her quartet are like, well, there's probably a lot of innocent women in there, or ones that have committed crimes that do not deserve to die. And, you know, they're not all the extent of this person Donna believes is in there that was responsible for the kidnapping and death of her childhood best friend. So, and then we get to book 4, and this is where we finally get back to Arthur, you know, and he has been doing the searching that I mentioned, claims that he, you know, he knows this troll, and there's a troll that, and this is where it's leaning very heavily into the medieval fantasy sort of element. So he believes that they can summon this, like, metaphorical sword to help them vanquish sorrow. So, you know, very similar to, you know, like, and there's a really great line that I did not want to make sure. A library card was as good as a sword drawn from a sword to Arthur. That's something that Gwen mentions at one particular point. So he believes that, you know, this troll can assist him with some knowledge, and so Colin Wren actually goes out to the UK to join him. And this is a very cool cinematic scene. They have to spend so much freaking money to make this into a series, and it would probably have to be multiple seasons, and the budget would be astronomical, but this was one of the more cinematic scenes, you know, along with everything that was going on the plane with the dragon flying beside them and fighter pilots and all that shit from book 2. But this is an interesting bit with this troll. I'm trying to remember something, it was like Stuart Finger or something. Anyway, so this troll leads them down into these underground tunnels, and, you know, there's spiders and there's all this craziness going on. And some stuff happens that we get significantly more clarification in the following book, because when Colin and Arthur are down there searching around and trying to, you know, gain this knowledge that could potentially allow them to vanquish this dragon and break this blood pact with him, yeah, Arthur ends up dying. And so right when I thought he was going to come back and be that pivotal part, then I was just like, okay, as we get the clarification in the final book, that the final book within the monstrous-sized novel, you know, Colin and Arthur searching in the tunnels in the UK. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned only the full extent of it, but it is like a very cool site. And also Robin Fellows is around there, because she's apparently, because each of these fast-forwarding years, as I had mentioned, she has befriended Arthur, both of them being in the UK and everything, obviously. So we find out after, the Gwen Under Attack 4th interlude, this is where Robin has, like, officially joined their quartet and has made friends with, I mean, she kind of steps in, and along with Tana is, like, a supporting member of this quartet, Tana being the, pregnant girl that was the sister of our early villain. So many villains in this, guys and gals and everything else. I mean, so many villainous presences that don't all add up to something that I found quite as compelling. But nevertheless, a linchpin here is that Robin sees one of the short little, like, I can't remember if it was a periscope or a vine or whatever, but she claims that she sees this, like, 6-second video of this, like, troll-looking dude out in, like, a very rural area of the United Kingdom that, like, eats a goat and, like, elongates his jaw to put the whole damn thing down and everything. And so she's like, I know where that is. And so she goes and finds said troll, and that's where she gets some clarification about who actually is responsible for the death of Arthur. And here is the villain turn, guys. You find out Colin. Colin killed Arthur, and he apparently, as we found out at the very end of book 4, this St. Helen blood of a saint that he was able to obtain through the assistance of the troll and everything, that is giving him this youthful vigor and keeping him young even as the rest of, the Rackham Quartet are aging and everything. And so then we actually get a lot more insight about the fact that Colin was pretty much leading everybody to who he wanted them to execute and hand over to Sorrow on the yearly, except for Gwen. Gwen is the one who we find out more about the fact that she has stood up to Colin for years and years and years, and then me sniffing around, my intuition about her becoming the hero, now with Arthur dead, now finding out that, because Arthur was her love, but she ended up having to break it off with Arthur to basically spare his life, or else Sorrow was going to go after him, and that's something that happens much earlier in the book. But nevertheless, I'm not trying to spoil every beat and every entire thing for you guys, but this final book 5 is entitled Save Yourself, and yeah, this is where it all comes together with the figurative sword, and with, Gwen really rising to the occasion, and along with the help, it does become very, like, female empowerment, which I'm all for, obviously, at the very end, because it is Robin, and it is Gwen, and it is Donna and Allie that end up near the end of this and in the finale really coming together despite differences and everything, and being the ones to go after Sorrow, especially when you find out that, Colin Wren was this, puppet string puller. He was monitoring through, his tech savvy. He's given them cell phones on the yearly and various things so that he could just monitor their texts and make sure that, nobody was going to go against him or suspect any of his villainy or whatever. So, I really did like the Colin character for most of this, and so it was a villain turn that I still contend, excuse me, wasn't as earned as I wanted it to be, but I mean, yeah, he definitely, he's with Donna by this point, and he's kind of worked to manipulate her along with, everybody else, but Gwen has always kind of suspected him over the years, and this is where it just, all comes to fruition. But this is also where that subplot about Jane and Tana's mom finally getting out of prison and, romping around in this vehicle she bought with the small amount of money that she got when she's being released. And she's been thinking for decades and decades about wanting to seek revenge for the death of her daughter. And so she doesn't know shit about the dragon or anything, but she just knows that there's something off with this group, and that, she's pretty positive that they are responsible for her daughter Jane's death, and the evil villainous presence from the very beginning of the book who was blackmailing Arthur, and it just doesn't feel like, it feels pointless. It feels like, when their mother, released from prison, comes after and shoots up a number of these girls. So and Colin as well. Colin is like in intensive care, on the verge of death, but one of the few things that keeps him probably is from drinking the that blood of St. Helen, which is now dwelling in the cabinet of curiosities that we've mentioned. And I mean, I just felt the book losing steam by this particular point. It just had pivoted to so many different things and all of these subplots that I had mentioned. And even as I'm talking about it and thinking about it, I'm liking these beats in the book like all finally coming together. You know, the twist of Colin being the villain, and I mean, we do get some major redemption for a few characters because, you know, some stuff goes down with Colin where he thinks he's going to drink the rest of that saint's blood, and after being wounded and, you know, shot up by the crazy old woman out of prison and everything, and Gwen gets shot up and is also on the verge of death along with Colin. Donna just gets barely injured a little bit, but Robin's there, Allie's there. And then Tana, the younger daughter, the one who was spared from Sorrow's vengeance because she wasn't really a part of the book scheme that summoned him in the first place, she comes because she is also part of this newly redesigned quartet of women and bashes her mom's head in and stops her from going full-blown rampage and killing all of the surviving members of the quartet and everything. But yeah, it's just the finale just didn't do it for me in the final tying up of the loose end of this subplot and everything. It's something that I feel like could have been omitted. I genuinely do. And I think I've really, I mean, aside from Colin attempting to summon this this character, this Elwood Hondo, which you go all the way back to the seance from decades past that they watched the old film reel of, that Colin's grandfather had. That was apparently this presence, which was almost like a made-up presence that they were trying to like will into being. And so it's almost like they say with certain evil otherworldly spirits, well, where they will say that they're who you're trying to summon, but are they though? You know, because they're very deceitful if they are of that particular ilk and stuff. And you know, Elwood ends up becoming the demise of Colin. So you know that by this point, all the guys are dead. So Colin's dead, Arthur is dead, although Arthur is a constant presence. His spirit is like with Gwen, and she kind of like realizes him and sees him, you know, from time to time and dreams of him and all this stuff because, you know, they were the star-crossed lovers who had to, you know, she broke it off and everything. And then Van, you know, my favorite character, the lovable, you know, drunken cokehead kind of clown character of sorts, you know, so all the dudes are dead, and it's up to this smaller quartet of women, which is, you know, Donna, who is trying to redeem herself, and then Allie, who is trying to come to terms with herself, who is now suddenly attracted to Tana, so that's a subplot we're going to roll with. It's fine, you know, I just wanted Allie's character to be happy in her own skin, and I mean, the alcohol has taken such a toll on her over the years, which is one thing that Joe makes very apparent in the storytelling here at the end of this monstrous book. And then Gwen, you know, rising to the occasion of virtuousness, ends up, you know, having some of that saint's blood given to her, so she's able to heal much quicker in time for Easter, when she is supposed to be this sacrificial, you know, one that was chosen by Colin before he died, so she's supposed to be this Easter sacrifice, and then she's like, nope, we are going to do everything in our power to vanquish the dragon here, and it comes down to a showdown, obviously, since they're trying to gain the spiritual assistance of Arthur and Van. The Van assistance is much more so for the soothing of the spirit of his sister Donna, but, you know, Arthur is the one who had come up with this idea of this, like, mythological figurative sword to combat the dragon with, as all too often in medieval lore when going after dragons, you know, you need that mythical sword to take it down and everything. And so that's what ends up happening. Without going into too much detail, I just did not like the final showdown with Sorrow, especially what ends up happening with him courtesy of the sword, and a mistake that he makes, because I don't want to completely spoil the very end of this, but the ending just didn't do very much for me, you know? I was endeared and fascinated and cared about these characters, even the super flawed ones like, you know, Donna and Allie, and even to a degree Colin, who I feel like kind of lost his way over the course of this massively lengthy narrative. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. And then we get to an epilogue, and we find out how things kind of wrap up with certain characters, you know, the fates of all of them and whatnot, because once again, I'm not trying to spoil every little bit. So, I mean, yeah, Gwen out from under. And so there you have it, guys. That's like all of the spoilery thoughts, and I feel like I attacked the spoilery stuff a little briefer because of the fact that I wanted the predominance of this video to be just my impressions of how Joe handled this massive tome and if I feel like he was successful with it or not. I feel like in a lot of instances he was, but I mean, just to get back to it, as I finish up this video finally, and I knew it was going to be a dragon-sized video, it was going to be massive, and I'm glad my voice didn't completely cave in on me, but King Sorrow, as all too often happens with these massive books, its ambition was impressive, but not always successful. But once again, art is subjective, as I say all the time and have said once before in this video. This book has received high praise from a lot of people. To say it's my least favorite Joe book feels cruel. Because I don't know, man, Heart-Shaped Box was so distinctive in its ghost story, and he's apparently going back for this book Hunger, which is presumably going to come out next year, so it's not going to be a 9-year wait for another Joe Hill book, but yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say it's his worst book, but it's, for me, my least favorite of his books. Great prose, excellent character development, ambitiously plotted out and everything, but just to use that phrase once again, my alliteration of big bloated book, you know, it's about as overstuffed as Sorrow's belly would be after, you know, just eating to his heart's content. He loves talking about, and this is another thing that's similar to the entity that takes on the visage of Pennywise in It. I mean, it's fear and guilt and these negative emotions that sweeten the meat, and I know that's not something that is completely unique to these otherworldly evils, you know, beyond Stephen King. I mean, I'm not going to say it's a trope in literature, but I feel like there are a lot of similarities, even though, you know, King Sorrow doesn't take on various forms or anything like that. He does take on a form of being, like, invading the minds of these characters before he physically manifests from the long dark of Todash. But, yeah, I enjoyed this. It was fascinating to see the ambition of Joe wanting to do something like this, but apparently Hunger is a much shorter book, and it's, you know, presumably coming out next year. But, I mean, the talents of Joe for just putting something this massive together, I'm still impressed, even if I was not, like, completely over the moon, flying with dragons over it, but I think that it boils down much more so to personal preference, because I did really enjoy the medieval stuff, but there are just a lot of other ideas, a lot of those subplots, all of these different villains, from mercenary secret organizations to, you know, to old women trying to seek vengeance for dead daughters. I mean, not all of it worked for me, but I'm still glad that I took the plunge. I will obviously read anything that Joe Hill does, just like his father, and just like Owen and everything. So, which reminds me, I need to get back to that last book from Owen, because I did purchase it, but got lost in the shuffle of all these other things that I've been reading, whether Stranger Things or, you know, whatever. But, so I guess that is going to do it for King Sorrow. My thoughts were just as big and bloated and lengthy and unconcise as this book, so I feel like that is rather befitting in that regard. So I extend a grande gracias. Thanks if you have made it to the end of this video. I've been Jaime En Fuego, and you can find me on all social media sectors: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, the threadies, the tiki-talkies, all that shizzle. I put up a lot of short film reviews, like short reel, like around 3-minute size stuff. That's where I'm concise with my thoughts. It's anytime I have a big book like this to get through that I go just big and bloated and bold with it, just like Joe did with King Sorrow. I like, you know, share, subscribe, and obviously commenting. And if you think I just didn't get it, or that I was being too harsh on some of these subplots that I felt didn't really, like, coalesce too well together, obviously let me know. Or if you share some of these sentiments, you know, I mean, we're never going to agree on everything, and that is what makes just the experience of art so great. So whether this is on Enfuegotainment or the horror show, also, all of those Hail to Stephen King videos, all 330 something of them, we have a Stephen King themed playlist on the Horror Show channel, youtube.com/the Horror Show channel, like you're seeing below. Also, the Run to the Hill, we have all of the videos, reviews for 20th Century Ghost, Heart-Shaped Box, all of the aforementioned stuff, Strange Weather, which is great. I mean, all of Joe's stuff is great. This is the first one that I don't know if I would say it was great, but once again, that's just like my opinion, man. So, in any event, I've been Fuego, y'all have been Rad Status, and as I finish up all of Steve and his son's videos until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, Cinemigos constant readers and viewers alike, say thank you. I hope we have been well met, and we share more of this book palaver sooner rather than later, and until next time, whether it's on the Horror Show channel or my own personal Enfuegotainment, remember to stay scared and read Joseph Hillstrom King.